In September of 2025, the newest entry in the Silent Hill series released to the world. It was a first in many ways, set the earliest in the timeline, and the first to be set in Japan, pulling on religious and folklore traditions from the culture that first gave us Silent Hill. The series has always been influenced by Japanese culture, but it has never been so central to the story. For a Western audience, the themes of fox magic and trickery might be new, but to Eastern audiences, the idea of a mysterious, suspicious fox spirit is an ancient one. The kitsune is a classic monstrous creature in Japanese folklore, and has appeared in modern pop culture, anime, and video games for decades. But the fox of Silent Hill is certainly unique, and the story the game is telling takes ancient traditions and transforms them. To fully understand Silent Hill F, we have to understand the kitsune, and to do that, we have to travel back thousands of years to the origins of ancient myth. It's a long journey. This video is the longest one I've ever made on a video game story, and it explores more than 1,000 years of folklore and fairy tales. To get the whole picture, we'll explore the fox as a spirit, how it became a folklore staple, and how it evolved as a character over time. Then we'll look at the divine aspects of the fox and the deities it's related to, and finally pull it all back together to the story of Silent Hill F. What exactly is the fox creature we are dealing with in Silent Hill F? It's not an easy question to answer, since monsters in Japanese can be referred to by nearly a dozen different terms, each with slightly different connotations. In Shinto tradition, a spirit that is beneficial is a kami, what we would call a god. A spirit which is not beneficial may be a monster, a mononoke, obake, an oni, any number of negative terminology. Another way to look at it comes down to the spirit's willingness to answer human prayer. If the spirit can be pacified or negotiated with, it is a kami. If it is demanding and will not bend, it becomes a monster. The most famous term in the West is likely yokai, commonly used in modern manga and pop culture. It originated in folklore studies and the world of academia, and it isn't widely used before the modern era. Today, the term yokai typically covers nearly all supernatural, otherworldly beings that may be dangerous, or at the least, uncanny. Other terms like onryo, goryo, or yurei are specifically related to the dead, to human spirits, which remain restless due to injustice or anger. The spirits of non-living things like objects have their own terms, such as rei. All these terms are generally associated with doubt, suspicion, uncertainty, a fear that what we see may be deceiving us. One of the most general terms for these creatures is bakemono, literally translated to mean a thing that transforms. A bakemono is a creature of deception. Whatever its goals or its nature, it appears as something it is not, meaning it's a liar. This general term covers many of the great mythical creatures of Japanese myth, so many of which are centered upon transformation and illusion. In Silent Hill F, bakemono is the Japanese term used to refer to all the various monsters we face around town. It is a word that implies two things: a general association with the historical use of the term, with all the myths and legends around Japanese monsters. And it implies the monsters we see are things transformed. Every monster appears to have human features, clothing, or tools, implying these could very well be former residents of the town transformed into bakemono. The use of the term is an incredibly smart way to both tie the lore into Japanese mythology and to subtly hint at previous Silent Hill game lore. The fox mask, our companion and possible enemy, is clearly associated with the kitsune, the fox spirit. In Japanese mythology, a kitsune is a fox who has been alive for a long time, gaining more magical power with every 100 years it lives, and who performs transformations in order to trick humans. Most of these transformations involve seduction. The spirit becomes a beautiful woman to tempt human men. But there are countless variants of the transformation, most of them focused on trickery. Like other bakemono, the kitsune in Silent Hill F is a thing that transforms, shifting between a human wearing a mask and a fox with many tails. Now that we know what kind of monsters we're dealing with, we have to ask another question. Why the fox? There are many wild animals in Japan associated with monsters and myths, so why is it the fox that's the focus of Silent Hill F? And why is it that in myths, the fox is singled out as a seductive, monstrous spirit feeding on human souls? In some ways, it makes very little sense. Typically, animals like rabbits become sexual symbols because of their fertility and rampant sexual activity. But the fox is nothing like them. Foxes mate once a year, producing a single litter with one partner, who will remain with them the whole season. They are monogamous pairs with almost no physical differentiation between the sexes, making it very unlikely they would become a sex symbol for humankind. But in Japan, the sexual themes of the fox are ancient. A noble's diary from the year 1144 records an incident in which a fox transformed into a woman and seduced a teen boy in the palace. The writer, Fujiwara no Yorinaga, said he was certain it was a transformed fox because he saw one peering at him from under the eaves the day before. That was all it took to be certain of the culprit. To understand why sexuality is tied up in the fox myth, we have to understand the relationships foxes have had with humans since ancient times. The fox is a creature of boundaries, living on the edges between forests and fields, between pure wilderness and human civilization. It is one of a few wild creatures willing to come close to humankind, but it's not tame. Unlike the dog and cat, it cannot be fully removed from the wilderness, but neither is it completely skittish. The mix of closeness and distance means that across centuries, humanity has had close encounters with foxes in their backyards, but have been unable to control or drive away the creature entirely. That makes them a bit frightening, especially since foxes are very smart animals. The fox is a burrowing animal, living underground. Most of them are nocturnal, and while they can eat other things, they are meat-eating predators. They're associated with cemeteries. Ancient texts recording Chinese laws describe rules put in place to keep humans from smoking out foxes from their local graveyards, implying the animals were commonly burrowing among human dead. All these associations make them eerie in the human imagination, and that eeriness appeared in folktales early. An ancient Chinese text from thousands of years ago describes foxes as the mounts upon which ghostly beings ride through the night. Traditional Chinese Taoist ideas about the natural world divide all things into two basic energies, yin and yang, which blend and mix in certain amounts to create this living world. Yin is essentially dark, destructive, related to death and the feminine gender. Yang is its opposite, bright, creative, life, and male. Since the fox is associated with many things typically associated with death and yin, it became a feminine creature of ghastly supernatural origins. Folktales developed in which the fox was a magic creature that fed on others, specifically human men. In order to strengthen its own magic, tradition says, the fox needs yang energy, so it must transform into beautiful women to seduce men, a variation on the vampire concept. These stories originate in marvel tales called jigwai, which came to Japan as early as the 700s and would only grow and spread as the centuries passed, developing into a major cultural symbol. Most theories surrounding the kitsune myth and its origins tend to consider the sexual, more ghostly aspects as an influence deriving from these tales and Chinese Taoism, imported from the mainland thousands of years ago. Once we understand why the fox is a sexual animal, we can understand why the fox is the spirit of Silent Hill F. It is a game focused on marital traditions and the relationships between couples, and in the spirit world, the fox has been the romantic and sexual partner of mankind for centuries. If you want to tell a modern Japanese story about marriage to the mythical and divine, the fox is almost the only spirit it can be. But in Japan, the fox has other associations that aren't negative. And before we move on, we have to ask why the positive themes exist alongside the darker undertones. The Japanese fox spirit can be a divine messenger of the gods, a protective guardian, or it can be a dangerous trickster, a malevolent demon. If the darker side came from China, where did the positive one come from? Foxes hunt in human farmland, eating small mammals and rodents which are drawn to the rice fields. Their travel to and from the fields matched Japanese folk traditions of the comings and goings of the gods. When it was almost time for the mountain god to descend to the fields for the growing season, the fox would arrive, making it appear as if the fox was heralding the coming of the divine. This dual association with the divine and the rice crop is a popular theory for how the fox became the symbol of the beloved rice and food god Inari. So it's possible that general experiences with foxes in small farming villages of Japan were positive, or at least not very negative. By eating rodents that threatened the harvest, you could even consider their presence a blessing. When blended with imported tales of fox monsters and yin magic, you start to see how the dual nature of the fox spirit comes to life. Now we see how another piece of Silent Hill F originated. We are exploring a small farming village, full of fox statues and little shrines, which have their ancient origins in the field fox and Inari worship that started thousands of years ago. If you are telling a story about the fox spirit, setting the stage in a place like Ibisugaoka is almost a requirement. Now, we have to see how these fox stories developed and what became of them. Some of the earliest mentions of the fox come from records of omens, starting in China and later appearing in Japan. Across a few hundred years of early Japanese history, the appearance of foxes in the imperial palace were written down in the records and marked as omens, at times as symbols of good fortune, others as foretelling disaster. Good foxes were typically white, while evil foxes were described as red or black. As centuries passed, the appearance of good foxes became rare, and foxes became more deeply associated with ill fortune, possibly because more stories were being imported from the mainland that portrayed foxes negatively. Another possible reason for this increasing negativity comes from Buddhist tradition, which began arriving in Japan from the Korean peninsula in the 600s. The religion eventually took root as a major part of Japanese culture, and its stories and scriptures became massively influential. As these works were translated, concepts which did not exist in Japanese had to be given associations that would make sense for a Japanese audience. Originating in the Indian tradition, Buddhist texts often used animals as symbols or characters in their moral tales. But animals like the jackal and other mainland canines had no equivalent in Japan. These animals, portrayed negatively in the stories, became associated with the term kitsune. Records show this term was used for a few wild animals and spirits in the ancient past, but over time it became primarily the term used for foxes and fox spirits. Thus, the fox took on the role of a negative symbol in Buddhist literature. All these themes and traditions blended, pulling Indian, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Shinto, Buddhist, and Taoist ideas, threading pieces of each into the complex nature of the fox spirit. It became a vampiric threat and a divine spirit, a messenger of God and a devious trickster. Its myriad natures are likely a boon for the spreading of its story, since the fox could be anything, good or evil, divine or demon. Now, let's discuss the actual fox myths themselves. Generally, the fox myth can be narrowed down to a set of scenarios. Usually, someone is being deceived by a fox. The fox succeeds in their deception for a time, successfully pretending to be what it is not. The most common roles are a bride, a beautiful woman, or a monk or religious figure. Eventually, something happens that forcefully reveals the fox's true nature. The fox flees, sometimes disappearing without harm into the wilderness, other times being killed or sealed away. The end of the story usually involves a return to normalcy, as the man who was tricked is relieved to have escaped. In more romantic stories, there's a hint of lust, perhaps a promise between lovers to reunite. In the more religious stories, there is often a moral about greed or lust. Some of Japan's earliest fox myths are collected in the Konjaku Monogatari, a huge series of some 30 texts collecting Japanese oral stories, as well as some tales from mainland China and India. Collected and written down around the 800s to the end of the 12th century, these stories reflect the oral traditions of the late Heian period, and quite a few involve fox spirits. Here are some examples that give us a broad glimpse into the early role of the fox in Japanese folklore. Some stories present us with the classic doppelganger conundrum. In the first version, a man is presented with two women who look exactly like his wife. He quickly realizes one of them must be a fox in disguise. Unsure of what to do, he grows angry and confused and draws his sword on the women. Both of them are terrified, begging for their lives. Eventually, one of the women is revealed to be a fox, who relieves itself on the samurai before fleeing. The fox meant no harm, the story says. It simply wanted to play a trick. In another similar story, a man comes across his son's wet nurse and her exact copy, arguing over the man's son. Again, the man draws his sword. This time, the fox disappears into thin air, leaving behind the real wet nurse and the man's child. They are unconscious. Exorcists have to be summoned to return them to their senses. The end of the tale implies a moral surrounding the safety of children. You should be careful when you let them play alone, because a fox might snatch them up. These stories reflect the general anxiety and fear that surrounds the idea of bakemono, or transforming things. A creature like the fox, capable of turning into anything or anyone, is a threat to the natural order of the world. The relationship between spouses is very personal, yet even the husband cannot recognize his own wife when a fox is involved. In the face of uncertainty, the wife herself becomes a threat and a victim of her husband's violence when she's entirely innocent of wrongdoing. In both cases, the victim of the transformation is a woman in a subservient role to the male master of the household. The addition of the man's son to the story hints at a major element of fox lore, the threat to lineage and bloodlines that a spirit transforming into a wife implies. While the fox in these stories is the intruding figure and the threat, it isn't punished or harmed as it will be in some other tales. In fact, the man comes across as less sympathetic than the fox. These lords and samurai were powerful figures who were as much a threat to the lower class as they were to the fox. The man may succeed in restoring order, but he fails to avenge himself against the fox. An animal relieves itself on him, and he ends up looking rather feeble and weak in comparison. Another story type presents the fox spirit as an assistant or in some way subservient to humankind. These are stories where the fox is a benevolent figure, providing a service or boon to a human in return for a good deed or due to the demands of a human. In one of these tales, the nobleman is traveling when he comes across a fox and captures it. He commands the fox to travel to his home and inform his family he's arriving with guests. At the man's home, the family becomes concerned when the wife of the master grows ill, but when they summon a priest, the woman begins to speak. The spirit of the fox possessing her and convey his orders begs them to obey for fear of his life, and when they promise to do so, the woman is set free and recovers. In another story, the fox is possessing a young woman while playing around with a round white ball. One of the samurai present snatches the ball from the fox, who grows angry and demands the return of their property, and that she'll curse the man if he refuses. However, if he would return it, she would become the man's guardian angel. The swordsman is uncertain, but agrees, and the fox spirit is exorcised from the woman. Sometime later, the samurai is traveling at night when he suddenly feels a sense of danger. Remembering the fox's promise, he cries out, "Kitsune, kitsune!" As promised, the fox appears and leads the man safely through the road, avoiding the band of robbers who were awaiting him. The story says this was only the first time the fox protected him. It would in fact remain his guardian for the rest of his life. Another common story from the ancient era involves the ownership of land. In one of the variants of this story, a nobleman decides to hold a fox hunt on his land in order to rid himself of the troublesome animals who keep playing pranks on his household. The night before the hunt, the nobleman has a dream in which an old man approaches him and begs for mercy. The old man is actually a fox, and the troublemakers are his grandchildren. After some cajoling, the nobleman agrees to pardon the foxes so long as the grandfather keeps them in line. From then on, the foxes are well behaved. Another variant of the servant role involves the purchase of a house and how foxes are driving new possible buyers away. A nobleman comes to the house and is approached by an old spirit. The spirit tries to argue this is his family's house and has been for generations, but the nobleman says buying and selling homes is normal, and trying to drive the buyers away is not proper behavior. The old man, obviously a fox in disguise, agrees but essentially argues they had little choice since his family has nowhere to go, unless they receive permission to move to a nearby vacant lot. The nobleman gives them permission to claim the lot, the foxes move, and the nobleman claims his new house where nothing abnormal happens. These stories of fox servants fall into the tradition of reinforcing power structures. The noble is exerting control over his household and his land, and over the lives of those who live there. He can kill the foxes if he should choose, but so long as they obey him, so long as they obey the rules of society, they can live. A third, more sensual version of this idea presents the fox as a lover. A young man finds a beautiful woman in the city and tries to seduce her. She hesitates, telling him that she will die if they were to lay together. She agrees to sleep with him, but only if he promises to pray for her spirit after she passes. They spend the whole night together, and in the morning as she leaves, she makes him promise to copy the Lotus Sutra for her. She tells him to look for her in the morning, and when he does, he finds a fox's corpse with a fan covering its face. In this variant of the fox myth, a man who sleeps with the fox will be killed unless the fox chooses to die instead. This version of the story is a good deed by the fox, primarily due to the Buddhist overtones of the story. The spirit of the fox appears to the man to tell him she has been saved by his actions. His soul, too, will likely be saved, and what began as a sexual tryst becomes a moral lesson about detachment from desire. Ultimately, the fox's death and rebirth reflect a detachment from worldly things, but the very act that saved her was lovemaking, desire itself. All these stories of foxes, servitude, and good deeds tend to reflect reciprocity in Japanese society. A culture heavily focused on community, these stories reinforce popular morals and the social structure of the time. Like the previous tales, the men involved are nobles or samurai. They have power over the foxes, giving them orders, holding their belongings hostage. The foxes obey or conform to the actions of their betters and are treated well when they do so. When the human treats the fox well, the fox returns the sentiment. Generally, it shows how the world should function when everyone performs their proper societal role. It also reflects the general ambiguity towards sexuality that appears in fox myths. Generally, the fox as a seductive woman should act as a negative. As Buddhism grew more popular, sex in general, and women in particular, were seen as sinful and lesser. And yet, stories like this cannot show sex as a negative when sex itself is part of what saves people's souls. The very act of writing this kind of story reflects a divided mindset towards sex and women, a desire for the very thing you are condemning. The fox is best known for its love of playing pranks, and the danger it gets into when those pranks go awry. In one story, a group of city guards in the capital attempt to capture a woman they believe is a kitsune. The story involves local rumors about a woman who wanders the roads asking for a ride on a man's horse, only to make them lose their way and disappear. One of the men is dared to find and capture this troublesome spirit, so he targets a woman he suspects and trusses her up to his horse. When he arrives at the guardhouse, he drags her to the other men, who all agree they should turn her loose to have fun. But the moment she's untied, she transforms and flees, and the entire scene is revealed to be a fox's illusion. The guard awakes to find himself in the wilderness miles from home, and becomes gravely ill for days. But once he recovers, he's determined to try and catch the fox again. This time he drags her to the guardhouse and keeps her from escaping. the woman is tied down and tortured until she transforms back into a fox. Yet in the end, they let her escape with her life after demanding she stop performing tricks. The story ends with a final conversation on the road the next day between the guard and the fox, who is a woman once again. This story, like the story of the Buddhist fox, reflects the divided nature of the kitsune. If the fox is a villain, why is she allowed to live? These stories that attempt to condemn sexuality cannot escape their own desire for the woman, ultimately attempting to titillate with scenes of men surrounding and tormenting a helpless woman, an act they cannot be condemned for since this woman is really a fox. It's a moral tale, but it's also a sexual fantasy, presented in a guise that allows the reader to feel no guilt for the woman's suffering. Another story with a more deadly prank involves the fox's transformation into a tree instead of a person. A young man and his servant are wandering the mountains when they come across an enormous cedar tree. Knowing no such tree should be in the area, they become suspicious. Deciding to go home to be safe, the two attempt to return. But as they do, the moon rises, a strange light gleams from the tree, and the mountain suddenly takes on an eerie energy. Just to be safe, they decide to shoot the tree with their arrows. Returning the next morning, they find the tree has vanished and been replaced with a deceased fox. This story shows us something about the narrative of the fox, being the first story I've presented in which the spirit actually dies. This trick is minor, yet this is the trick which gets the fox killed, possibly because the fox is not taking on a desirable role. When we are presented with a beautiful woman, the fox is allowed to live to continue the fantasy. Other foxes are not so necessary. A third story involves a young swordsman walking home in the capital city when he comes across a beautiful woman walking the same way. When they come near her home, however, he remembers rumors of a fox spirit in the area and becomes suspicious. He draws his sword, growing violent, trying to strip her naked to determine if she's really human. When she struggles, he threatens to slit her throat, pinning her to a pillar. But at that moment, the woman relieves herself on him, breaks free, transforms into a fox, and gets away. In the following days, the man continues to look for the woman, finding he's drawn to her in spite of himself. The desirable fox escapes with her life once again. After humiliating the man, the fox escapes in a way that is the ultimate insult to the nobleman involved. Yet the man in the story still wants the fox, quote, in spite of the smell. If the story is a warning against strange women at night, why is our male character still drawn to her by the end of the tale? Once again, the push and pull between moral and sexual fantasy is reflected. Most trickster folktales involving the fox are centered on the dangers of seductive, mysterious women. The women in these stories are inevitably met in strange, outlandish places, on the edges of the wilderness, in the dead of night. They have no identity, no clan name or backing. In this light, the stories may reflect a general upper-class concern with improper women, those of lower social classes. It also generally reflects a growing hatred for the feminine gender. As Buddhism, and especially Confucianism, were imported from the mainland, Japan became more and more concerned with controlling and punishing women for their role in sexual acts and desire. And yet, these seductive women tend to survive, humiliating the men involved, making them ill. Even when they are captured, they're allowed to live. Is the man truly the victor here, or is it the woman? In a way, the story balances both sides, allowing the social structure and male dominance to be present in the way the fox is captured or has their true nature revealed. Yet the woman fox's escape and survival reflects a desire for her and the fantasy she presents. Desire for the other, for the lower and lesser, who continues to have their own power and autonomy, tempting the man and evading him, leaving him wanting. There are a few dozen stories involving foxes in the Konjaku Monogatari. They generally give a broad view of how the fox is used in folklore of the era, at times as a romantic, desirable figure, at other times a malevolent vampiric monster. They are pranksters who get their comeuppance, or they are helpful assistants to admirable humans. Foxes in this era represent an incredible breadth of themes, making it hard to decide whether they are truly meant to be seen as monsters, tricksters, or gods. Already we see a plethora of associations to the fox that appears in Silent Hill F. Trickery and transformation is an obvious one. Since we know we cannot trust what we see, Various people transform into monsters before our eyes. The town transforms into a foggy, flower-covered nightmare. But the specific doppelganger theme is even more relevant. Throughout the game, we encounter our friends in various scenarios that make them appear suspicious the further we go. Hinako travels the town with Shu only for him to disappear and suddenly reappear. She falls asleep and dreams, finding him trapped in a prison where she kills him. Much later, we learn Hinako herself has a doppelganger, and we have been playing two versions of the same character. The monster that's been chasing us is ourself. The doppelganger reflects uncertainty, doubt, and fear. In fox myths, the inability to be sure of what or who is real is the crux of the narrative. The story of the nobleman and two doppelgangers focuses on his inability to be sure who his wife is. This inability undermines his entire life, his authority, his role as the head of house, and as a husband. Who is he if his wife is not who he thinks she is? If he takes a fox as a bride, he could ruin his household and end his lineage. Better to kill both of them than risk it. Doppelgangers are a threat to the family, the clan, to future generations. It undermines the social structure, threatens the very relationships that define our culture and our lives. If we cannot be sure who people are, if we cannot be sure who we are, we cannot function properly in our roles. Silent Hill F's entire narrative focuses on cracking and breaking those roles and relationships down, revealing how much they twist and destroy the people forced into them. Nothing is better at bringing this theme to the fore than the doppelganger. Other, smaller symbols appear in these tales that should also be familiar, such as the mention of a magical jewel in one story. This jewel appears in the game as well, as an object in puzzles and as decor in the shrine, but we'll discuss it later. Another is the cedar tree, mentioned in the myth of the fox transforming into a tree. Cedars are the tree of Inari and the fox. Sacred trees and cedars in particular are major concepts in Silent Hill F. And of course, these old tales are all about romance, sex, and subservience to those in power, and these are obviously part of Silent Hill F's story. But these tales aren't exactly the same as Silent Hill F. None of these relationships are about brides, save for the doppelganger. These are all about men desiring unmarried women they should not want. It will be in other stories that we find the fox in the marital role. Another ancient source of fox tales are the Setsuwa collections. Setsuwa can be translated to spoken word. These are collections of oral tales from the Heian period, which were primarily recorded by Buddhist monks. Some of the oldest fox wife tales are found in Setsuwa. Buddhist monks were generally not fans of marriage, and may have interpreted fox wife tales as condemnations of the practice, and included them in their collections for that reason. Foxwife stories involve mysterious women who become the brides of young men. Usually the marriage goes well for a little while, before the truth is revealed and the partnership ended. One of these stories is the Foxwife of Mino. A man sets out on horseback to find a wife, and meets a beautiful woman beside the road in the countryside. She agrees to marry him, and they return to his home and begin living together, eventually having a child. Life is good. The woman is a supportive wife, though she's not fond of the family dog. She asks her husband to kill it, but the man can't bring himself to do it. Months pass, and one day the dog almost bites the woman, who becomes so frightened she leaps up onto the hedge and transforms into a wild fox. Her true form revealed, she can no longer remain in the household. However, her husband speaks to her, saying he cannot forget her, as they have had a son together. He bids her to come to him at night, to come and sleep, or in Japanese, kitsune. The story is a folkloric explanation for why fox spirits are kitsune, relating it to the wish of a married man for his supernatural wife to stay the night with him. Their child takes on the surname Kitsune and inherits incredible strength and speed from his mother. The story is also an explanation for the ancestry of a notable family, part of a tradition of stories used to explain the bloodlines of notable local clans. In the Heian era, marriage typically meant one of a few traditions. A man may move in with his wife's family, or a wife and husband may live in separate homes and visit one another. However, it was very uncommon at the time for a wife to move into the husband's household. Instead, the most common tradition at the time was for a husband to move in with his wife. Marriages, particularly between the upper-class nobles, whose records and stories are best preserved, were nearly all economically and politically motivated. Rarely were they purely romantic or based in love. For a man to marry a woman with no social background or clan of any kind, with no consideration for how the marriage would benefit his family, would be seen as wrong. In The Foxwife of Mino, the young man, never named, finds his bride outside of civilization, on the borders of the wilderness. She has no family, no backing, yet he takes her into his home regardless. There's no mention made of any other family or clan members in the story, leading to the image of a single man and wife making their own home. The wife is eventually revealed to be a fox by the domesticated dog, the rival to the fox. It reveals her wild nature, that she does not belong in a domesticated household, forcing her to leave. On the one hand, this could be seen as a condemnation of marriage to an unknown woman, but the rather peaceful ending of the story might imply the opposite. Like many other fox stories of this era, the narrative balances the need to reinforce tradition, the fox is revealed, the improper marriage ended, while also allowing the fantasy to continue. She promises to return to him to continue their conjugal relationship. When the man invites her to return to him at night, the story is pulling upon marital traditions of the time. Spouses that lived separately would visit each other at night to spend the evening in bed together. However, the fox's nightly conjugal visit turns tradition on its head. It was the man who would visit his partner's home for a rendezvous. It would not have been the woman making that trip. Their son takes on the mother's surname, not the father's, and since his father is never named, the male bloodline and clan disappear completely from the story. Is this a warning to the audience to avoid certain women for fear their bloodline and clan name will vanish? Or is it a challenge to tradition, showing a man willing to name his son after his wife? The openness to interpretation once again shows how strong the fox myth is, capable of both reinforcing social traditions as well as challenging them. A similar story from this era is The Foxwife of Bichu, the story of a married man who becomes enamored with another woman. He invites this woman to move in with him, but she defers, saying it would be improper. Instead, she invites him to live with her, and he does so, staying with her family for 13 years. He has a son with his new bride and seems completely unconcerned with his former family, never going to see them. Their marriage comes to an end when a monk appears, revealing the true nature of the woman. She and all the other residents of the house are foxes, and the manor was actually the hole beneath a storehouse. Only 13 days had passed. The monk who appeared was an incarnation of the Buddhist deity Kannon, who was answering the prayers of the man's family. This story, unlike The Foxwife of Mino, is a more outright condemnation of the behavior of the man. The story reveals how lust and selfishness nearly get the man killed, as he is half starved by the time he leaves the fox's dream. The theme of bloodline and lineage continues. The man forgot his human wife and son, abandoning his responsibilities and his bloodline. But when the fox's dream ends, his son with the fox is also revealed to be a fox, who abandons him in turn. The fox as a threat to patrilineal bloodlines and male lineages reappears, this time without the romantic interpretation of The Foxwife of Mino. This story is one of a type, which will reappear in various guises over the ages. A man becomes enamored with a foxwoman and moves in with her, spending years together, only for someone, usually a religious figure or a god, to appear and dispel the illusion, revealing the man was living in a hole in the ground underneath a house or temple, and the bride was a fox in disguise. In these stories, the foxwoman is not presented romantically, but she does typically escape. This variant of the fox bride is a heavily Buddhist one, used to reinforce Buddhist ideas about sex, women, and this worldly life. However, there is a variant of the tale in which the man seduced is a Buddhist priest himself. In this version, the story is both making fun of and condemning the false priest, who falls for worldly seductions. referencing the fact that real-world Buddhist priests had a reputation and were often not as devout and pure as they pretended to be. Both the Foxwife of Mino and Foxwife of Bichu stories are from compilations made around the 9th century, making them some of the earliest versions of the Foxwife myth. They reflect Heian-era marriage traditions and social beliefs, and varying ideas about marriage and what makes a woman a proper bride. Comparing them to Silent Hill F, we already notice a few interesting things. For one thing, our Fox wedding tale does not have a bride. Even as we move into modern centuries, there are no fox husband tales. I have not found a single one out of the dozens of journal articles, academic texts, and folklore collections I've read. Because of Taoist tradition and Chinese myths, the fox was heavily associated with womanhood, and instances in which the fox is not a woman are primarily non-sexual beings. Monks, religious figures, very old men. In this way, the fox can be seen as a feminine or genderless spirit, but not a masculine one. That already tells us something about the narrative Silent Hill F is creating, but we won't explore that just yet. What we do see is a trend towards some romance. It's clear the couple in the Foxwife of Mino love each other. We're not certain to get that sense from Silent Hill F. Even though Fox Mask seems to believe he loves Hinako, and Hinako seems to want him, we see little traditionally romantic behavior between them in the manner of the Mino story. There's a general sense in these myths that fox marriages are non-traditional and antisocial. The man that marries a fox woman is failing to perform his role in society. The story has to end with the fox revealed so to set the world to rights, to return the man to his proper place. Silent Hill F is going to do the opposite. The fox is reinforcing tradition, and the narrative focuses on our protagonist's struggles against and attempts to escape that tradition. In every major way so far, Silent Hill F pulls on fox traditions and then inverts them to tell a uniquely horrific modern version of the fox myth. Ancient stories of fox magic aren't relegated to folktales. The belief in these creatures was very real, and historical accounts also reference magical happenings. One of these is the Record of Fox Magic, written during the Heian period by a scholar recording historical events. According to this short document, the capital city was greatly troubled with fox magic in the year 1101. The author tells stories of great ceremonial feasts in the city streets which are revealed to be made of refuse and cattle bones, transformed to look like food. These were called fox banquets and occurred at least 3 times that year. This idea that foxes can create false food or feasts out of disgusting objects is a common one, and it appears in many folktales. Usually, the fox tricks a human into attending a grand feast with sumptuous food in a fine mansion, only for the human to awake in the morning and find themselves passed out in a graveyard, surrounded by filth and bones. There is an obvious fox banquet in Silent Hill F, though it too turns tradition on its head. In fox myths, the protagonist finds a glorious banquet that only later is revealed to be trash and filth. In the game, Hinako finds her parents at the wedding feast, where the food is rotten filth and garbage. Only she seems to realize it, reflecting her unique perspective on the event. She is the only one who feels something is wrong. Having examined a plethora of ancient stories, we can now move from the Heian period into more recent Kamakura and Muromachi periods, or the time between the 13th and 16th centuries. This was an era of immense change and violence as the power structure of the imperial court was overthrown, and the samurai shogunate took control of the nation. Wars, plagues, famines, natural disasters were all abundant. It is a dire time of history, far more violent than the Heian period that preceded it. One of the major elements of fox stories and folklore is the idea that these spirits can possess humans and take over their minds and bodies. While there are stories of fox possession going back into the oldest myths, it is in the post-Heian period, especially the 15th century, that possession stories truly began to spread and take center stage. One example appears in the diary of Fujiwara no Sanosuke. The nobleman writes of the possession of the high priestess of Ise, describing how her voice became wild and loud, how she demanded constant crazy dances from others at the shrine for days. At the same time, shamans and mediums in the capital city began to worship foxes, declaring them to be the true god of Ise. He ends the diary entry with a mention of the latter days of the law, referencing the Buddhist concept of Mappo, the belief that at this time Japan was in a kind of pre-apocalypse, that society was swirling the drain and the end of days was on the horizon. Much has been discussed in academic literature as to possession and the need for individuals to vent stress. There are countless theories across cultures as to how possession relates to societal pressure, that it acts as a kind of stress relief valve. An individual can act out and behave in socially unacceptable ways and be defended from the consequences because they are possessed by an outside force. When you consider that as a possible reason for possession, it becomes clear why fox possessions become more common at this time, because this was Mappo, the end of days. More people were suffering and struggling, and there was more stress to vent, even if you were the high priestess. Japan has always been a highly regimented class-based culture, going back hundreds of years. The Japanese, particularly the poor and lower class, rarely had much control over their lives, and were expected to behave in ways that best supported the community and their family rather than themselves. For the Japanese, the fox possession became a way of exhibiting individualistic behavior in a safe way, because it can always be said they were possessed. This might relate to why women, especially lower-class women, are documented as the most common fox possession victims, because they were under the greatest pressure in this society. Traditionally, possessed behaviors relate to generally odd behaviors, but also the impossible. The person might become more sexual and depraved, they might eat weird things, or they might suddenly become able to read and write even though they were illiterate. Some would begin speaking Chinese when they never could before. Others might simply express animalistic, fox-like behaviors. Silent Hill F hints at the concept of fox possession by portraying many of the tropes of possession in the main character. The scene in the shrine stairwell where Hinako is speaking to herself is a major hint. Earlier we saw her standing there with Fox Mask, but now she's alone. It's almost as if Fox Mask is just a figment of her imagination. Hinako's confusion while exploring the town, her seemingly distorted or changing memories, the way figures come and go, and she fades in and out of reality, could all relate to traditions of fox possession, adapted to the general themes and motifs of the Silent Hill series. This era of Japanese history sees the rise of the stage tradition of No. No is a very stylized performance art which developed from ancient Chinese and Japanese dance and folk performance traditions. Performers wear masks, sing and dance on a specialized stage, which uses almost no stage decor or props. The focus is on the highly skilled performers, singing and dancing in ways that are esoteric and often heavily religious. Starting in the 14th century, No became a popular art form among the upper class, and many works were written that used the fox spirit as a motif. One of these plays is Surigitsune, or fox trapping. Surigitsune is a story focused on a Buddhist priest and his nephew, who is a hunter that traps animals. However, the priest uncle is actually a kitsune in disguise, who lectures the nephew on the immorality of killing and trapping animals. The nephew is suspicious of his uncle, so he sets an animal trap, captures the priest, and reveals his true nature. But when he attempts to kill the spirit, it escapes. Buddhist morals do prohibit killing. The priest is speaking the truth, but he's doing so for selfish reasons, which might be why the story allows him to be caught and humiliated by the nephew. However, he is not killed, because that would go against the Buddhist message. He escapes, leaving the hunter without a catch. The story of Surigitsune does follow many older fox myth traditions. The fox becomes a priest, does so to perform a trick, though in this case the trick fails and the human nearly succeeds in catching the fox. This reversal is definitely part of a trend, as many of the other more modern stories will involve a human successfully turning a trick back on the fox. Like most other tales, the fox still escapes. But it's not because the fox is powerful or slippery, but because it reinforces the Buddhist intent of the play. Another No play related to foxes is Kokaji, or the swordsmith. This story has less to do with the fox spirit than Inari, the god the fox is said to serve. Since we're discussing No, we'll go ahead and cover it. Kokkaji begins with the emperor having a dream in which he's told to commission a sacred sword from the great swordsmith Munechika. When he wakes, he sends a message to the smith, who is reluctant to agree. A smith needs an assistant to complete such a work, and he has no one of equal skill to work with him. Hesitant, he agrees and decides to seek out the Inari temple to pray for guidance. While there, he is approached by a young boy holding a sheaf of rice, obviously Inari in disguise, who tells him to proceed with preparations to make the sword. When the day comes, Inari himself appears in divine garb and a fox mask to act as the swordsmith's assistant, and the two forge a sacred sword together before Inari returns to the heavens. Inari is definitely not intended to be the same as the fox spirit of myth. However, the blurred lines between the two in folktale is clearly seen in the stage play as well. We'll discuss Inari in detail later on. For now, let's merely mention this play reinforces the association between the two, and shows an early modern usage of the fox imagery in a story of divinity. It is after the 13th century that Japanese marriage traditions begin to evolve in a direction that more closely reflects the modern day, one focused on the male bloodline in which a woman marries into her husband's household. The fox in this context becomes emblematic of the social issues surrounding this newer style of marriage, the pressure on a woman to transform into a wife, taking on new traditions and a family culture that are not her own. In these stories, as opposed to older tales, the fox wife's nature is often revealed by her own children, in the act of performing her duties as a female member of the household. The child, revealing the mother's secret, becomes a reinforcement of the male patterns of tradition, siding with the father and reinforcing their bond. In the Mino and Bichu stories, the child of the fox and the man is associated with the fox, takes on her name, becomes a fox, and leaves with her. In later tales, the child of a fox and a human is human, and is left behind with the father when the mother leaves. In this era, the paternal bloodline becomes the central focus of social structure, the way family and clan is organized. And so the stories in which the fox must leave and the child remain reinforces tradition. Children belong to their father's bloodline. The most famous example of this type of narrative is the story of Kuzunoha. The tale originated in an early Heian-era folktale called The Foxwife of Shinoda. In later centuries, the older folktale was blended with the mythos of a historical figure, Abe no Seme, to create the story of Kuzunoha. Abe no Seme is a historical figure from the Heian era, and is the most famous onmyoji, or sorcerer, of the imperial court. After his death, stories of his exploits grew, developing into a massive legend portraying the man as the Merlin of Japan. In the Kuzunoha story, Abe no Seme's mother is a fox bride. Abe no Yasuna was a nobleman traveling the countryside when he came across a trapped fox and set it free. Later, he encounters a beautiful woman, Kuzunoha, who helps him when he is injured, and the two fall in love. They have a child, and when the boy is young, he happens to catch sight of his mother's tail, revealing her true nature. Kuzunoha is forced to leave, but she leaves behind a poem for her beloved, in a romantic scene that has been portrayed in art countless times. She tells her husband that if he misses her, he can find her in Shinoda Forest. Yasuna and his son travel to see her, and Kuzunoha reveals she is a kitsune and the deity of the local shrine, before blessing her son with great powers. Their son, Abe no Seme, grows up to become one of Japan's most famous historical and mythical figures, a man of great magical power. This story associates those powers with his fox mother. Though she is unable to play the traditional role of a mother due to her nature, she is able to watch over him in a religious and spiritual aspect, granting him protection and power unavailable to the average man. He may carry his father's name and bloodline, but his story and legend is far more associated with Kuzunoha, and she is the more famous figure. Like the foxwife of Mino, the story of Kuzunoha is more romantic. Later versions of the myth would add even more tragic details to the story and elaborate further on the mythos of Abe no Seme. A kabuki play, The Courtly Mirror of Ashiya-domon, would involve another historical figure, the mythic rival of Seme, the titular Domon. In this version, Kuzunoha the fox takes the place of Abe no Yasuna's wife while the woman is traveling away from home, adding the doppelganger element to the narrative. When the wife eventually returns, the trick is revealed and Kuzunoha has to flee, once again leaving a poem for her husband, and once again watching over her son as a guardian deity. If you long for me, come see me in Izumi, where in the forest of Shinoda you'll find your Kuzu of the clinging vine. As the ideal version of the Fox Bride, Kuzunoha informs nearly all the many variants of romantic Fox Bride tales. Her figure is romanticized. She is a loyal, supportive wife to her partner who bears him a son and only leaves him because she must, and she regrets it so. She leaves him a poem and a way to find her again. Poetry as a means of seduction was a major part of Heian-era noble culture, so the poem scene is an incredibly romantic scene. Once Kuzunoha's true nature is revealed, she becomes more than just a bride or mother. Kuzunoha is divine. Her power protects her family, transforming her into a kind of ancestral deity in the style of Amaterasu and other divine guardians. Kuzunoha's most relevant connection to Silent Hill F may come from an almost minuscule detail. Her name. Kuzunoha's name, literally translated, means leaf of kuzu, also known as Japanese arrowroot. Kuzu is a clinging vine native to Eastern Asia. Artwork of Kuzunoha associates her with the plant, and historically it has become a symbol for her character. One of the 7 herbs of autumn, kuzu is considered a medicinal herb with many healing properties, some of which modern science has found supporting evidence for. It was also commonly used for food and textiles, making it a very versatile, useful plant in Japanese history. Symbolically, it's associated with strength and vitality, because the plant grows so well and spreads so easily, climbing across impossible surfaces, growing over other plants. It is also a romantic flower, because the image of the vines intertwining with other plants took on a sexual connotation in the Japanese imagination. In poetry, it has 2 major associations. As a plant of autumn, it takes on the somber, mourning imagery of a plant in the season of dying flowers. And as a symbol of romance, it often appears in love poetry. As for pear and jujube and millet too, do I long to meet you, as trailing kudzu parts and meets again, so on the day we meet will hollyhocks bloom. In English, the kuzu plant is known as kudzu. Now we begin to see the connections to Silent Hill F. Kudzu is a plant referenced constantly throughout the game, appearing in multiple riddles and collectible items as part of the decor. The plant's heavily associated with Fox Mask and the Fox family, because it is a plant with a heavy connection to Fox mythology. In fact, at least one Japanese walkthrough of the game I found refers to the talismans in the Dark Shrine as Kuzunoha, directly connecting the game to the mythic wife. The symbolic meaning of the kudzu plant takes on a dark context in Silent Hill F. It is a plant of love, a love that grows and intertwines. It is a vital, determined thing, growing and refusing to let go. Fox Mask's love is just like the kudzu, the way the fox pulls Hinako in, pushes her to become part of his clan, to participate in their rituals. He is entwining them together more and more deeply, until her very humanity is gone. The same thing is happening to the town, as it is covered in countless different plants overgrowing the roads and buildings, climbing the walls just like the kudzu vine. In the United States, kudzu has a reputation as the plant that ate the South, because it's an invasive species that can grow out of control, completely swallowing the environment. The reputation is well known in Japan. I found multiple Japanese articles on the plant which mentioned it, and the Japanese Wikipedia page on kuzu did as well. In that light, it's easy to see how Silent Hill F might have developed a theme of overgrown, overwhelming flowers. The kudzu, the romantic clinging vine of Kuzunoha, has a connection to both foxes and dangerous overgrowth. If Kuzunoha represents the ideal fox bride, the desirable supernatural woman, her opposite is Tamamo no Mae, the most monstrous of fox spirits. Like Kuzunoha, her story developed over centuries, originating in folklore before being adapted into written fiction and then stage plays in the 17th century. The story goes that Tamamo no Mae was a woman living in the Heian era in Japan, a member of the imperial harem. She was beloved by the emperor, but she had an uncertain background. However, she was beautiful, talented, and extremely intelligent, quickly becoming the emperor's beloved favorite. One night, during a bout of stormy weather, all the lamps in the emperor's palace were extinguished, and in the dark, the beautiful courtesan glowed, shedding a gentle light across the room. The emperor's attendants were terrified, but the emperor took it as a good omen and gave her the name Tamamo no Mae, Jewel Maiden. Others at the imperial court disagreed, particularly Abe no Yasunari. He was certain Tamamo no Mae was a malevolent spirit negatively influencing the emperor. But eventually, the emperor fell ill, and Abe no Yasunari determined Tamamo no Mae was the culprit behind his illness. So Yasunari hatched a plan using magic and trickery to force Tamamo no Mae to reveal her true form. The plan worked, and the woman transformed into a fox before the eyes of all the imperial court. She was forced to flee, and Abe no Yasunari gave chase. A long hunt ensued in which multiple religious and magical traditions were used to finally defeat and seal away the fox spirit. As time passed, the story of Tamamo no Mae became intertwined with other fox legends, especially those from the mainland. It became tradition to say she was an ancient spirit who had been feeding on the powerful for centuries, including King Yu of China and King Hanzoku in India. Tamamo no Mae is the most infamous of the female fox spirits, and the most dangerous, and is rarely presented with redemption. In Tamamo, we see the archetype of the malevolent fox. She pretends to be human, manipulates her way into a position of power using romantic wiles, uses magic to fight against a sorcerer and a god, and eventually is defeated and sealed in a stone. The fox mask has a similar role, particularly as a final boss, and many of his darker traits mirror Tamamo's. He also appears to glow in the dark, can travel at the speed of light. He uses a romantic relationship to manipulate others, has powerful sorcery, and has taken on a powerful role in a major clan. Between the two figures of Kuzunoha and Tamamo, it's clear Fox Mask has more in common with the malevolent bride, and there is little if any of the soft, romantic themes of Kuzunoha in his character. In this era, we see the fox myth take on deeper, more complex lore. Characters who were previously known merely as foxwives become named women who have personality and motivations for good or ill. We see the fox appearing on the theatrical stage in more specialized forms of art, as both a figure of trickery as well as a divinity appearing to assist mankind. The fox is still sometimes a god, sometimes a demon, but we also see a tradition developing somewhere between the two. With Kuzunoha, we have a fox who tricks and pretends to be human, but is well-intentioned and associated with the divine. The fox spirit is becoming more complex, harder to pin down, and its morality more open to interpretation. Now we come to a fascinating era of Japanese history, the Edo period, around the 17th to 19th centuries, a time of incredible change for Japan. The borders of the country are closed, sealing off the outside world. The social structure became firmly entrenched and the government had strict control over the people. Yet at the same time, the economic structure of the world was changing, allowing access to wealth and stability to many people for the first time. Art, theater, music, poetry, fiction, and nonfiction were all in an explosive period of growth and creativity. The development of printing and widespread economic growth led to a boom in reading, as well as an explosion of genres and styles that weren't seen before, where past narratives were heavily religious, moral, historical, or educational. Stories that were purely meant to entertain and even titillate began to become widespread in the Edo period. This included purely sexual and romantic stories, but it also included satires and comedies with no greater meaning than having a good laugh. One of these stories is Hiza Kuruge, serialized in the 1800s. The title means A Journey on Foot, and the narrative is a slapstick comedy about two friends on a pilgrimage together. One portion of their journey uses the fox myth for a gag. During the pilgrimage, while traveling the road, the two men split up, one man running ahead to find an inn. The second man, Iyaji, meets a woman on the side of the road who warns him there's a fox bewitching travelers on the road. Iyaji continues as night falls and he grows increasingly nervous until he hears a yelping fox and starts to shout. His friend, Kidahachi, had also heard about the fox spirit and was worried about Iyaji, so he turned back to find him. When he hears Iyaji yelling, he calls out to him, but Iyaji becomes convinced this is a fox spirit disguised as Kidahachi. Iyaji proceeds to test his friend in many irreverent, overly personal ways, such as feeling him up to find a tail, until a dog comes near them and doesn't react, proving Kidahachi is not a fox. Iyaji apologizes, and the journey continues. Another comedic story of the era is the Lucky Tea Kettle, a story in which a human man saves a fox's life. Out of gratitude, the fox uses its magic to assist the man in becoming rich. It transforms into various objects the man can sell for a profit. However, each time the fox is sold, it ends up in dangerous, comedic circumstances that cause trouble for the fox. The human ends up marvelously rich, while the fox suffers for his transformations over and over. The Lucky Tea Kettle reflects the shifting nature of the Edo period, the focus on making money, on the exchange of goods, how deeply the social and economic shift was influencing storytelling at the time. Generally, these comedies show a side of the fox that was less common in more ancient eras. The fox as a figure of slapstick silliness. As a monster, there is a danger and threat inherent in the spirit that should make it difficult to poke fun. But in the modern era, when reading and education have become more widespread in the cities, comedic stories about foxes might reflect a growing relaxation of the attitudes around such monsters. Monster stories were as popular as ever, and scary, spooky narratives were widespread, but they existed beside these comedies, possibly reflecting a societal move away from pure belief in the supernatural. Of course, more serious, sentimental interpretations of foxes were still common. A famous example appears on the kabuki stage, in a play called Yoshitsune and the Thousand Cherry Trees. The story adapts events from the historical Genpei War, depicting the fallout between the Minamoto and Taira clans. Yoshitsune was a warrior of the Minamoto clan who helped them win the war, but was later betrayed by his brother Yoritomo when the man became shogun. The play is set during Yoshitsune's flight from his brother's men. During the conflict, one of Yoshitsune's men, Tadanobu, is replaced by a fox spirit. Eventually, the fox is caught, and the spirit explains he infiltrated their group in an attempt to get close to a drum. The drum was made from the skin of his parents, and every time it is struck, the fox can hear his parents' spirits crying out. The fox wants to set them at rest, and Yoshitsune, overhearing this explanation, is touched by the fox's loyalty to his family. Yoshitsune is a beloved figure in Japanese history and folklore. He's a hero, a great warrior who sided with his brother in the war and was undoubtedly the greatest contributor to the success of the Minamoto clan. And yet, his talent and loyalty are betrayed by his own family, and this brave warrior ends his life tragically. As a narrative, his story embodies so many tropes that are beloved by the Japanese. Tragedy, betrayal, an incredible warrior brought low. To this day, he's a popular folklore figure. The addition of a fox to his narrative in the stage play gives his story new, tragic dimensions. The audience knows the fox spirit. They expect a trick or cruel manipulation when it becomes clear Tadanobu has been replaced. So when we learn the fox's motives are pure, are based on filial love and devotion to his parents, we are awestruck. A devious monster like the fox still knows to honor one's family. How horrible it is, then, to be Yoshitsune, a human being whose own brother is hunting him down after everything Yoshitsune's done for him. The tragedy comes from Yoshitsune's recognition of the fox's pure spirit, the way that this highlights just how terrible his own situation is. The author uses the fox spirit's folkloric reputation to make a statement about his human characters. As in previous centuries, the fox again appears in Buddhist moral tales, now more than ever before. In this era, with widespread adoption of printing, priests and didactic writers trying to reach a large audience could write moral stories down and spread them further than they could with a stage play or a spoken performance. Morality-based Buddhist supernatural tales became widespread, written without using kanji so the lower classes could easily read them. One of the most famous of these is the Otogiboko, written by Asai Ryo and published in 1666. We might call these stories adaptations rather than original works. The author took dozens of mainland folk stories from China and the Korean peninsula, adapted them to Japanese locations, names, and traditions, and gave them an overt Buddhist message about the futility of worldly desires and the need for Buddhist teachings. Most of these stories are ghostly or supernatural, which made them entertaining, while also focusing on Buddhist themes and figures who overcome the supernatural with ease, reinforcing the strength of the Buddhist religion. In one story, a man on his way home comes across a fox in the road, standing on two legs. He sees the fox attempting to balance a human skull on its head, and failing to, over and over. Folklore tradition says this is how the fox takes on a human guise. Eventually, the spell succeeds and the man watches the fox transform into a woman. The woman, catching sight of him, begins a sob story about her family being killed and having to run off on her own, and the man pretends to believe her, deciding he's going to trick the fox. He takes the woman home and gives her a place to stay at his inn. Sometime later, a local daimyo, or samurai lord, stays at the inn and catches sight of the beautiful fox woman. The lord demands the innkeeper hand the woman over. He hems and haws and says he can't, unless he's compensated. So the lord pays him and takes the woman. The woman becomes the lord's favorite, more so than his wife. But after a while, a Buddhist priest appears and tells the man he's being possessed and fed upon by a monster. The lord denies it, even as he falls ill. But eventually he's sick enough to send for the priest, who once again insists a monster is the cause. The priest has a long diatribe during the ritual, speaking the most of all the characters, decrying the fox and using Buddhist language to condemn her. The spirit is so frightened she dies on the spot. The lord immediately recovers, and the story ends with a mention of the incredible power of the priest, and that the innkeeper moved away and no one knew where he went. It's obvious the priest is given center stage here. The fox doesn't even get the chance to fight back. It dies right away. The incredible magical power associated with the priest is meant to draw in the audience to associate Buddhism with great power. If the priest is this strong because of his faith, Buddhism must be the real deal. Many stories focus on this kind of presentation of magical ability on the part of the priest before a demonic entity, using the monster as a means to show how strong Buddhism is. Collections like Otogiboko reinforce for the populace the power of Buddhism against the supernatural. Silent Hill F is no different. When it comes to the actual endgame states, the objects used seem to be built on Buddhism. Silent Hill F is built upon the same roots as its forebears. Like other games in the series, the power of the place comes from a dangerous flower, and the drugs developed from it. Power that originates in the flower can only be defeated by the Aglaophotis, or red liquid. Silent Hill F also has the flower and the red liquid, but it associates the liquid with a specific deity. The bottle that contains the liquid is named after Hote, or the Laughing Buddha, one of the 7 gods of good fortune in Japan. Another major Buddhist figure who appears in the town is Jizo, the guardian of young children. Statues of the god are found throughout town, and each guards a piece of a puzzle required to unlock the sacred sword, essential to the better endings of the game. These Buddhas are in essence related to victory or defeat. The worst ending of the game, in which Hinako accepts her marriage without struggle, comes from the ending unlocked by the red liquid, a reversal of Silent Hill tradition. This is not a true victory. While we might have won the game, Hinako has lost, so Hote becomes associated with defeat at the fox's hands. The other deity has a better track record. Jizo is associated with the best endings because the god is needed to obtain the sacred sword and to offer up the brooch that sets Hinako free. Jizo, guardian of children, has done his job well in Silent Hill F. Hinako, trying to find her own way as she shifts into adulthood, is protected one last time by the Bodhisattva who watches over deceased children's souls as they play on the riverbed of the underworld. Like many fox tales, there are countless threads of myth woven into Silent Hill F, but like the moral tales of Otogiboko, the ultimate victor in the fight between divine and supernatural seems to be Buddhism. Jizo is the reason Hinako has a chance to forge a new fate, because the magic of a fox cannot overcome the Buddha. Of course, that doesn't mean all Buddhists are safe from foxes. Here's another real-world tale, this time from the Edo period. In the year 1818, a group of monks from the Higashi Honganji Temple bought a plot of land to build a villa for their abbot. When they began examining the grounds, they found there was a small shrine and a family of foxes living there. Worried about upsetting the spirits, they considered abandoning the project. However, word spread the emperor was planning to come visit the new villa, so they decided to move forward with plans to destroy the shrine. One day, after inspecting the construction, the abbot and his party left to return to their temple. There were at least 30 men with them, including 4 higher-ranking members of the temple riding in palanquins. As they left, they headed north instead of south, which was the opposite direction to the temple, but no one noticed they were going the wrong way. They kept walking and found themselves in a rice field that seemed to never end. It was like treading in a land of dreams. No matter how long or far they walked, they never left the rice field. The longer they walked, the more tired they got. But the night never seemed to end. Mud-soaked and exhausted, the men finally found themselves crashing the abbot's palanquin into a hedge near a farmhouse. The angry inhabitants shouted at them, waking the men, who realized it was dawn and they were very far from home. This story, like others we've mentioned here, reflects an aspect of Buddhist-themed fox narratives that poke fun at Buddhists, specifically those who are not perceived as moral or authentic. Like the Buddhist monk seduced by the fox woman, the abbot and his men are not behaving like true Buddhists. They are clearly wealthy. They're concerned about the appearance of the emperor, a politically motivated worldly concern. They are quite literally going in the wrong direction, away from salvation, and in the story, away from their temple. As Buddhism spread and gained power, and the wealth and influence that came with it, the fox myth began to be used to critique corruption in the Buddhist tradition. Silent Hill F also has a major focus on getting lost in a strange world, in a night that won't end. More than that, Hinako wanders into a rice field that has its own strange dimensions. No matter how far you walk, you cannot return to the town until you solve the puzzle. The image of the monks wandering for ages in the muddy fields, turning round and round, is very similar to Hinako's wandering through Ibisugaoka. It's inevitable that stories of the fox tricking people into losing their way would become associated with rice fields because the fox and the rice god are deeply intertwined. Now we have just a little further to go as we walk into the near modern era, consisting of around the mid-19th century to early 20th. It marks the time when the Japanese nation opened its borders and was forcibly reintroduced to the outside world by the black ships of the West. Realizing they had fallen far behind in terms of technology and scientific development, the government threw the nation into an overhaul that changed the daily lives of nearly every person. Society had a seismic shift. But some of these changes happened too fast or were not well planned, leaving behind some of the most vulnerable. At the same time, some of the powers that be saw the way the Western powers were dividing up the world and wanted to do the same on their side of the globe. The path to the world wars was being laid. In this era, modern Western scholars were able to visit and even live in Japan, leading to a series of outsider perspectives on Japanese myths and folklore. One example is Lafcadio Hearn, a Western scholar who wrote a great deal on Japanese folklore. He recorded all kinds of details about the fox spirit and its reputed abilities, including a strange modern version of the fox transformation. In this tale, which appears in many forms in the 1900s, the fox spirit transforms into a phantom train, appearing out of nowhere on the railways next to real trains, frightening the engineers. Other Western writings on the fox from this era include the works of physicians. In 1872, Dr. John Barry described his experience as a Western doctor in Japan, specifically stories of fox possession amongst his patients. He saw it frequently, and the story usually began with someone traveling alone at night, losing their way, and meeting a beautiful woman. In scientific terms, he found the patients were usually suffering from anemia, anxiety, sleeplessness, and depression. The doctor admitted in his writings that though he could often cure the illnesses, Local priests were about as successful as he was at curing possession. To a modern mind, the ability to cure an illness through belief points towards mental struggles and conditions that might be overcome through performing traditional rituals that feel like a cure to the practitioner. According to his records, nearly all the examples of fox possession he knew were lower-class women. The fox has been in folklore and has appeared on the stage. In the early modern period, it would also appear in what a modern audience might call fiction. Fictional stories in Japan have existed since the Heian period. The tale of Genji is often called the world's first novel, as a written work of the imagination meant to be read by oneself rather than performed or read aloud. In 1907, Tales of Spring Rain by Ueda Akinari was published posthumously, a collection of short stories in the yomihon genre. It is both distinctly modern in its writing style and also heavily influenced by ancient myth and Chinese legends. In the story The One-Eyed God, a young man traveling to Kyoto takes a rest in a forest and finds a small abandoned shrine. He decides to spend the night beside the shrine. While trying to rest, he sees a group of people approaching. There's a tall Shinto priest carrying a spear, followed by a yamabushi or mountain ascetic, a lady-in-waiting dressed in white and red robes, followed by the lady's maid. The woman has the face of a white fox, which she hides behind her fan, and her maid is also a fox in disguise. The tall priest begins to speak an invocation. The man is frozen, terrified, watching as the shrine doors open, and a figure with tangled hair and a single eye emerges from within. The tall priest explains to the god he is representing the Yamabushi, who is traveling to Kyoto and passing the area, wanted to come and see this one-eyed god. The group settles and begins to prepare food and wine, and the human continues to watch in terror, seemingly ignored. However, the god eventually points out the man, telling the group to invite him to come join them. The fox lady approaches and guides the man to the party, where the god hands him a cup of sake and the human obediently drinks. The god then breaks into a long monologue discussing the young man's aspirations. He wants to travel to Kyoto to study to be a poet, but the god rants, telling him this is a pipe dream in an era such as theirs. The time of great artists and poets is gone. The world has gone to pot. He discusses how modern teachers of the arts are scammers and deceivers, how these artists have lost their way. Instead, the true artist must learn his own creativity. Poetry must be born from one's own heart. Finally, he tells the man to go back home and seek a teacher there and develop his own mind. The party continues. A Buddhist monk joins them. The fox woman sings in an unearthly voice. As the night winds down, the Buddhist priest joins his message to the god, telling the young man the road is too dangerous to travel. The young man agrees, and the supernatural figures teleport him home before leaving themselves. Like the stories in which the fox is used to condemn Buddhism, this story uses a multitude of mythic and religious figures to condemn the society of the time, particularly the art world in the capital city. The young man dreams of learning to be a great poet, but the great poets of the city are all frauds and thieves, according to these divine figures. They are positive, beneficent figures. They never threaten the man, they invite him to feasts, they treat him well and send him home. Despite the man's fear, he's never in any danger. The fox's role in the story is minor compared to the others, but clearly tied into the general themes of the fox and womanhood. It is the fox woman who approaches the man and draws him into the circle of divine figures. The main drive is the general group and their critique of human society. This story is part of a much larger trend in which storytellers use the supernatural to make political or social commentary. In the Edo period, when the country closed and the government became very controlling of the populace, Japanese writers' ability to critique society and their leaders became curtailed. How do you write about the powerful without writing about them? You make them monsters. One of the reasons that stories about oni, yokai, and vengeful spirits were so popular in the Edo era is because they were written using real-world history and political themes that appealed to the masses. The story of a young servant girl killed by her samurai lord returning to avenge herself has clear political connotations and says something about the structure of power in society. If it is right for the ghost to avenge herself against a powerful nobleman, clearly there's a moral here about the misuse of power against those weaker than you. In the Meiji era, Stories like The One-Eyed God continue the trend of discussing Japanese society through a supernatural lens. It would be one thing for the writer to have a human narrator decry society. It's far more impactful to imagine an ancient god of the land looking at modern human society and scoffing. So we see that Silent Hill F's social critique is by no means unique. Supernatural stories generally, and fox myths in particular, have developed a tradition associated with critique, using the powerful symbols of monsters to say something about people. We see it as far back as hundreds of years ago, in the story of Yoshitsune and his treacherous brother, in the Buddhist moral tales that tried to teach the masses, and in modern fiction that uses complex imagery to comment on the modern world. Silent Hill F is just the most recent variant in a long line of stories. Here, in the early modern period, we'll put our exploration of fox myths to an end. We could keep going, on and on and on, but I'll finish simply by saying the fox is still such a popular, prominent figure that it appears everywhere in Japanese popular culture. In video games, manga and anime, popular fiction, and of course, religious traditions. In the modern day, the most popular widespread Shinto figure is Inari-sama, the god of rice, whose divine messenger is the fox, and is often confused with the animal. Now that we've discussed the myths, we can shift back to ancient history and look at the god rather than the spirit, and see how this ancient farming deity became a kitsune. The god Inari has a history going back to before written record, having been worshipped in Japan since the early 8th century, but likely many hundreds of years before that. More than 1/3 of all Japanese shrines are dedicated to Inari, and many, many more unrecorded shrines exist in small, tucked-away places across the country. The god is a complex, multifaceted figure, so widespread that its associations and legends are incredibly diverse. There are Shinto and Buddhist versions of Inari. There are male versions and female versions. The few universal associations are likely the symbol of the fox and the association with rice and sometimes food generally. Ancient folklore says Inari came to the world during the early ages of history, during a famine. Descending from heaven riding a white fox, holding sheaves of grain, she came to save the people from starvation. Sometimes Inari is an animal, often a fox to the common people, though shrine priests emphasize that the fox is the messenger, not the god. Other traditions include Inari as a snake or dragon, though that's less common. The oldest depiction of the god is actually a white bird. Legend says that a man named Irogu was practicing archery using a rice cake. When he shot it, the cake transformed into a white bird and flew to the top of a mountain. When he followed it, he found rice growing there. Stories say this is where the Inari Fushimi Shrine was built in the year 711. The mountain was the site of a massive cedar forest. The tree became Inari's symbol, and most Inari shrines have cedars guarding them as protective barriers against evil. This most ancient site seems to have been focused on a deity of rice as well as commerce and trade, and it may have been related to the deceased, since the mountain was also the site of a burial ground. Later in history, Japan's capital city moved to Kyoto, which made it incredibly close to the Fushimi Inari Shrine. The prominence of the god increased as it became a guardian of the capital and the emperor himself. The shrine became a popular pilgrimage site, and the story of Inari grew. One tale said that in a past life, Inari made a promise with the monk Kukai to be reborn in Japan to spread enlightenment, associating the god with Buddhism. During the Onin War, the Inari Fushimi Shrine was burned to the ground, and its records entirely lost. At the same time, Inari faith still spread, taking on new shrines and new beliefs as feudal lords moved around the nation and brought their gods with them. Though the Inari Fushimi Shrine was rebuilt and is considered the central shrine of the faith, it is only part of a massive network of diverse beliefs of an ever-shifting, transforming god. Some of the spread of this god is related to the Inari sages. a group of wandering religious figures, most often women, who gave oracles they claimed came from the god Inari. The relationship between the god Inari and the fox existed from early history, but it became even more deeply intertwined during the Edo period. Both the fox and the god became symbols of wealth and prosperity, as stories began to associate Inari with monetary blessings. Before long, Inari became a god of commercial success, and the fox took on the symbolism as well. This association wasn't always good. The shifting of the social structure inevitably left some people behind, and inequality in this era was widespread. When societal pressures reached a boiling point, Inari shrines were often the target of protests, revolts, and rebellions, as they were seen to represent economic corruption and the selfishness of the rich. The fox was simultaneously the divine figure who could bless someone deserving with wealth, as well as the conniving thief who stole from hardworking people to serve a selfish, rich master. The anger of the poor against the wealthy would be aimed not just at Inari, but at the fox itself and at those who were perceived to be fox worshippers. These fox worshippers were believed to be people who became wealthy and powerful because of supernatural assistance, specifically unjust or demonic assistance, from the use of foxes as familiars. In a semi-fictional account of a riot against the government during the Edo period, the writer proclaims the man behind the suffering of the people is a fox, a traitor to his class, exhibiting a degree of low cunning and profit motive, a social climbing deceiver, and a merchant in samurai clothing. The man's real name was Endo Benzo, but the people called him the Fox of Fukuyama. Whatever the historical truth, he became a scapegoat, a way to vent out frustrations against the societal structure and inequality of the time, without directly challenging the status quo. This would happen across Japan in the early modern era, developing from ancient ideas about fox ownership and the capability of certain people to control demonic entities. Countless folktales tell stories of human beings who had connections with otherworldly spirits, who could use them to punish their enemies, to steal, bewitch others, and generally cause trouble. These folktales reflected real-world anxieties that were often targeted at outsiders, strangers, foreigners, those who in some way were not considered native to the community. Targets of fox accusations in the Edo period were typically the Novu Rishi, merchants and landowners who were not from historically powerful, wealthy families. Locals would accuse these people of being fox owners, of using fox magic to steal or otherwise unjustly earn their riches. This association could spread across generations, associating a family line or household with foxes, isolating them from the local community. One member of a so-called fox family wrote an account of his family's history to show just how deep the discrimination runs, the ways in which his family was ostracized, isolated from participating in local life, denied opportunities, and even refused marriage among the local populace. These prejudices can still be found in some villages in Japan today. We see this concept at work in the village of Abisugaoka. Multiple notes and various characters mention magic spells, mysterious deaths, powerful sorcerers, and families that control the village through the use of fox magic. The family that Fox Mask is associated with is implied to be a fox-owning family, though whether it's a human family with fox servants or actual fox servants transformed could be left to interpretation. The way that people are killed with spells and punished for disrespecting Inari-sama pulls directly from folk traditions about fox ownership and spellcraft. In the modern day, Inari is most heavily associated with wish-granting and luck. You go to Inari in the hopes of having a desire fulfilled, which might relate to the growing association with wealth that came during the Edo period. As the god of rice, the primary staple of the nation, Inari represents food, stability, survival. Food is our first and greatest want, so the association of Inari with fulfillment of needs and wants is a natural step out from its original role. As part of this wish-fulfilling role, one of Inari's most powerful symbols is the jewel. The wishing jewel is shaped like an onion, usually held by a fox statue, either in its mouth or held beneath its paw. At shrines, the jewel appears as an orb on fire. This jewel is a blend of two major traditions, Buddhism and Chinese myth. Old Chinese stories about foxes portrayed the jewel as an element of the fox's power, something either inside their body or held by the fox in order to use their abilities. In some tales, a human could take the jewel and gain those powers. In others, the jewel was only useful to the fox, but a human could return a lost jewel to earn the fox's gratitude. The appearance of the Inari jewel as an onion shape comes from Buddhist tales. In Buddhism, the wish-granting jewel is Sintamani, a Sanskrit term inherited from Indian tradition. These jewels are associated with bodhisattva, enlightened beings who remain in the cycle of samsara in order to enlighten and save others. The jewel is part of a set that often appears outside of Inari shrines. The two foxes guard the gates to the shrine, taken from the tradition of Korean dogs and other animals who guard Shinto shrines. The foxes are male and female, and each is typically holding an object. Most common is the jewel for the female, and either a scroll or a key for the male. Doctrinal explanations for this typically say the jewel is the treasure, a symbolic representation of the person's needs or desires, and the key is the ability to gain that treasure, granted by Inari. The person must unlock the treasure themselves, working towards their own goals even as Inari blesses them. Far older, more symbolic interpretations of the typical uses of these symbols are associated with Inari's fertility role. The jewel is the womb or the egg, symbolic of creation and life. A key is quite obviously phallic, and both symbols are given to a male and female fox respectively. During the widespread development of Inari's myth across the nation, one variant of Inari was a love and sex goddess, a natural shift from the rice and fertility goddess of its origin. In Silent Hill F, the jewel and the key are two objects used in early puzzles in the game. The key is given to Hinako by Foxmask, who says he made it for her, associating it with the masculine character. The jewel is not mentioned, but is later found by Hinako and placed in the mouth of a fox. The two objects unlock doors leading further into the shrine, just as they are in myth said to lead to the treasure and the fulfillment of wishes. Whose wishes, however, remain to be seen. There is one more element of Fox and Inari lore we haven't discussed, and it involves a far darker figure, the goddess Dakiniten. In simplest terms, Dakiniten can be seen as a Buddhist interpretation of the goddess Inari, but Dakiniten's history is far darker and more violent. Taken from a mainland demonic figure called the Dakini. In Hinduism and Buddhism, Dakini are demonic spirits who originally ate human flesh. In Buddhist tales, these creatures are redeemed by a god who teaches them how to survive without feeding on humans. Dakiniten became a goddess associated with Inari because of one simple fact. Like Inari, depictions of Dakiniten portrayed her as a goddess riding a white fox. Dakiniten may be best associated with Shingon Buddhism, a tradition with a special history in Japan. It is an esoteric tradition, a secret tradition that focuses on ornate rituals and spells passed down via oral tradition. Pulling from mainland tantric traditions, it uses occult rituals and focuses on the forbidden to bring the practitioner closer to the divine. Nobles in the Japanese imperial court liked the power that Shingon rituals promised, the ability to curse or bless, to cast spells on enemies, to influence the politics of court. Some of these rituals involved Dakiniten in her role as a fox goddess. The Dakiniten ritual promised worldly success and power. It would make the practitioner a fox owner, granting them worldly blessings through fox magic. One figure said to have used the ritual was Taira no Kiyomori, a famous figure in the ancient world, standing at the center of the conflict between the Taira and Minamoto clans, which would lead to the Genpei War and the downfall of the Heian golden era of history. The tale of the Heike is a famous fictionalized account of that war, and in one variant of the story, Kiyomori is said to have used the Dakiniten ritual and fox magic to achieve his power at the imperial court. This fact is used as justification for Kiyomori's inevitable downfall and the downfall of the Taira clan entirely. This version of the tale transforms the Taira's loss into karmic retribution against fox magic. Silent Hill F is related to the Taira directly. Ibisugaoka is said to have been a hidden village created by Taira soldiers fleeing persecution after the war. While the fox magic story may not be central to most versions of the Heike, the fact that this version exists seems very relevant to Silent Hill. We never fully learn why the foxes become involved in Ibisugaoka or how they arrived. It may be they were brought there by the Taira. Examining what little we know of Dakiniten's more secretive rituals, a few important elements stand out. Dakiniten has 4 princes, essentially servants who work under her, as part of a large entourage that most ritualistic traditions assign to their deities. Dakiniten's 4 princes are a set of young people who embody the anger and violence of a malevolent deity. There are 3 young women and 1 young man. First, the Heavenly Prince, wielder of the bow and arrow. The second is the Red Prince, a woman who wields the Jewel of Desire. The third is a young man who serves King Yama of the underworld and wields a quill and scroll. The last is the Black Prince, a woman who wields a sacred sword. The parallels are uncanny. It's a little outside the scope of this video, however, so we'll return to Dakiniten another time. Who is the fox spirit? Examining the stories of foxes across the centuries, we see a clear development of a personality, a history. With each century we pass, we see more traits and qualities being assigned to the fox. Ancient stories represented the fox as a trickster. Nearly every tale centered on the desire of the fox to make a human believe they were something they are not. Deeper motivations are not assigned. The reasons or desires of the fox are not explored. They are not named. They are not truly individuals. But as centuries pass, more thought is put into these roles. Fox wives become Kuzunoha and Tamamo. Fox tricksters become creatures who have specific goals in mind. They are also more morally vague. In the Lucky Tea Kettle, the fox is attempting to do a good deed for one man, but to achieve it, he is tricking and defrauding another. Fox Mask is not a purely monstrous villain. He has selfish desires and performs terrible deeds. He also seems kind, seems to truly like, maybe even love, Hinako. He doesn't fully understand humankind. Like many fox myths, he is attempting to fulfill a role, and can only do so by following his own animalistic understanding of the situation. Many of the ancient myths hinge on the fox attempting to trick others by following the rules of society, speaking and acting properly, and being caught when they trip up on unsaid rules. In the game, Fox Mask specifically says he was attempting to follow the traditions of human marriage, and he genuinely does not understand why that was wrong. In doing so, the game directly points out the obvious. The problem behind the entire narrative is not that the husband is a fox, but that the husband, as defined by this society, is destructive to the wife. The narrative would have been the same if that husband was human, so long as the same societal rules were followed. Examining all these myths, it becomes clear how much Silent Hill F knows about the fox and uses its traditions to incredible effect. Nearly every element of past folktales is present, but used in new ways, inverted to create new imagery. The bride becomes a husband. The fox wedding, as a form of marriage that goes against tradition, becomes an exploration of how the pressure to marry traps and torments young people. And a figure who has long been used to reinforce sexist ideas of womanhood becomes a symbol of the very societal pressures that torment women. It is a masterclass in storytelling, and the more I discovered about its mythic origins, the more in awe I was. Marriage to the supernatural as a means to explore the darker sides of romance and relationships in society. I said early on in this video the fox was almost the only creature this game could use to do that. That's not entirely true. There are countless mythic versions of the supernatural wedding, and this story might have worked with one other creature, the snake or dragon. But there's one detail of the story's themes that make the fox truly the one and only creature it could be: individuality. Explorations of the fox and Inari and their roles in Japanese culture reveals how deeply personal human experience is a part of their tales and their worship. From stories of fox possession that makes individuals act out on their own, or fox weddings in which love drives men to marry against their clan's interests, or Inari worship, in which each and every village has their own Inari with their own stories unique to their region. Individuality is at the heart of the fox and its themes. It is both the temptation of and the danger of the fox. It is the blessing it promises and the threat it represents. Abe no Seme becomes an incredible, outstanding figure, a true individual in Japanese history, in part because his fox mother makes him stand out amongst all other onmyoji. Tamamo, the vicious villain of fox history, stood out as monstrous because she was an individual woman of her era, courting the emperor, gaining power and notoriety outside the norm for her time. Foxes are symbols of the personal and individual, for good or ill, both selfish and healthily self-interested. Silent Hill F is all about the individual. It is about Hinako trying to decide for herself what her future will be. The fox is a threat to her future, but it is also her guide, her salvation. If not for this encounter with the fox and everything that follows, Hinako may not have come to terms with her own feelings and herself. It is also a story about every individual we meet who, according to tradition, should be reduced to their roles, should be behaving in accordance with their parts as husband and wife, mother and child, classmate and friend. But Shu, Rinko, Sakuko, the Shimizus are all individuals with their own problems, often made worse by the traditions society forces upon them, struggling to carry their burdens. What's the solution? Obviously, we can't just tear society down. What we can do is honor our own individuality by sharing it, by communicating, telling others how we feel, telling the truth. The best ending of the game comes when Hinako has honest discussions with her parents, with Fox Mask, when the truth is revealed about their relationships and how they all really feel. It doesn't solve everything, but it starts to set things to rights. In a society that creates pressure on all of us to change, to fit certain roles, the only solution is to be honest about how it makes us feel and what we really want, so we can figure out how best to fit in the world. This is what the fox myth teaches us. Deception never works for long. The fox is always caught. But when the fox bride is truthful, she can meet her husband again. She can watch over her child. She can exist on the borders of this world and the next, balancing her role as a divinity and a mother and wife. The fox in the myths is almost always able to get away, because even though we all need society and its rules to survive, there's a part of us that longs for the freedom that the fox represents. Maybe the fox can't truly be part of the human world. Maybe we cannot transform society into something softer overnight. But we can face ourselves in the mirror, acknowledge our own individuality, and stop trying to deceive ourselves. Only then will we find a way forward out of the fog.